Welcome to 360 Church. Good to see you all. And my name is Earl. With my wife Janet, I used to work here as the pastors, but we have been gone for quite a while on vacation. It was actually a staycation. We stayed at our house in Berkeley, which is extremely exciting there. And I have seen so many movies that my brain is just throbbing with explosions and dialogue and all kinds of memories. But please don't ask me what I've seen because I can't actually remember any of it. I'm a complete overload. Pacific Rim and Manchurian Candidate and everything. My mind is just wild right now. But what a wonderful way to rest and relax. We missed you all, missed being here. And we visited a couple of other really, really huge churches while we were on vacation. And we came back here and just thought, this place is wonderful. It's just wonderful because of who you guys are and just what you all bring here. So it's really, really good to be back. Does anybody know what the phrase "summer of love" means? Anybody? By not raised hands, yes. God bless you. Does anybody else by it? Yes. Thank you so much for that, Janet. I appreciate that. In 1967, there was a huge social experiment in the United States. It was echoed in Greenwich Village in New York City about the same time. But in San Francisco, in the Haight-Ashbury neighborhood, about 100,000 people, young adults, gathered to try something new. Our parents in that season told us basically, don't do this, don't do that, don't try that. They'd say don't drink with a Budweiser in their hand, that sort of thing. And so my generation, the boomers, decided, let's try it another way. What if we change the phrase to, let's do that, and put everything on the table? And so a size of the city of Berkeley, 100,000 of us came to San Francisco, inhabited that neighborhood and other parts of the city, and we mixed together a lot of poetry, a lot of art, a lot of music, a lot of dope, a lot of sex, a lot of dope, and flowers, and the whole hippie movement, some people say, really had its genesis in that place. And it was known internationally in 1967 as the Summer of Love. You may have heard the classic old rock song, "Are you going to San Francisco? You'll be there with flowers in your hair." That was all to encourage people. That was our infomercial to get them to come to the city for this experience. Because San Francisco was the place where you could leave the constraints of the Ozzie and Harriet slavishly served the military-industrial complex world of everywhere else behind and live any way you wanted, with revolutionary ideas like gender equality. It was a brand new thought in 1967. Lifestyles in all possible combinations of permutations. And the notion that our generation had was that if we could just experience enough free love, and if we could just throw off the constraints that had been imposed upon us by our hypocritical, not very smart parents, we would be able to discover this brave new world in which rather than being slaves to what we call the establishment or the system, serving that arch-villain of all time, the man, we could create a brand new, gentler, peaceful culture built around growing organic tomatoes in window boxes, art, community, sex, and more drugs. And if we could put all of that together, this new world would just throw off everything that the old world had put on us, like war and all these other things. And the core of the whole deal was free love. Now, I've got to tell you, in 1967, I'm in my last year of junior high school, and dang, I'm too young. I missed the whole thing, which, it's the story of my life. But the theory was that if we could just have enough of this kind of freedom, we could experience something really new, and it would be profoundly transforming for our society. In other words, San Francisco, and we could then say after that, Berkeley, because it's very much about the same time that the student protest movement erupts at Cal over card tables on the sidewalk, believe it or not. That's what instigated the whole thing. And we would, through that, become a city on a hill. And the world would be drawn to San Francisco and places like Berkeley, and through it, our influence would spread, and the entire world could become what we called flower children. And we would know peace, love, and joy for the first time, throwing off the shackles of everything that had been imposed upon us by the past. Maybe what we've learned between 1967 and today is that love is never free. In fact, love is the most expensive commodity there is. There is nothing more costly than love. So this month of August, our theme in commemoration of that great event in 1967 is the Summer of Love. This is really important, I think, for all of us individually and as a group. For one thing, Jesus said that the way people are going to know that we really were his followers for real was what? That we loved each other, right? And the other one was what Cheryl just pointed out this morning during the communion service, that it was love that cost Jesus a trip to the cross, so that faith in him, we could be free from the power of sin and death and inherit eternal life because of God's great love for us. Those are two pretty big deals. So this month we're going to talk about what it is and what it looks like and how it works its way out, because no matter what I said in 1967, I've learned since it really is never free. The only question is what we're willing to pay for it. Now, Jesus ran into this very issue while he was sending out his disciples to proclaim the kingdom of God, recorded in Luke chapter 10, and to heal the sick and free the demoniacs. And he sent them out 2 by 2, 72 of them, and they all came back and gave great reports over what God was doing through this proclamation of the arrival of the kingdom. And Jesus, Luke records, was filled with joy over this. And then, have you ever had a time when you felt really, really good, and just as things couldn't be better, somebody shows up and says something awful? They drop a great big fly about this big into your ointment, and you're like, oh, dang, you know. So Jesus is rejoicing, Luke says, and a lawyer shows up, and it says he stood up to ask him a question. Now, rabbis taught in first century Palestine in a seated position. Not like today when you get up to give a talk. You sat down to give a talk. But a lawyer rises up, and what that tells me is cross-examination is about to ensue. And so, you know what they teach you at law school is you never ask a question in cross-examination when you don't know what the answer is going to be. Never, because you don't know where that goes. And so the lawyer, probably thinking he knows where this is going, says to Jesus, what do I have to do to inherit eternal life? And Jesus cross-examines him by saying, well, what's in the law? In other words, what do the Hebrew scriptures tell you about this? And the lawyer responds, many people think these are Jesus' words. These are the lawyer's words. The lawyer responds, well, the law teaches us to love God with all our heart, mind, soul, and strength. In other words, with everything we are, we're to be devoted in love to God. And the other thing we're supposed to do is love our neighbor as ourselves. And Jesus says, you have said the right thing. Just go and do that, and you'll be good. But that's just not enough for this particular attorney. Luke 10 records that he's desiring to justify himself. Now, it's not really clear exactly what that all might mean. It might mean to appear smart. It might mean to make sure he really has a grip on it, that he's being motivated by some desire to appear that he's really got it all together here. And so he says to Jesus the simple, innocent question, who is my neighbor? And you know something? I think right there he asked something that he did not know the answer to in advance. Because instead of giving another kind of a dialogue reply, Jesus tells him this story, which we have come to know since then as the parable of the Good Samaritan. And it begins in Luke 10. We'll begin reading at verse 30. Jesus replied, a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho. That's not just figurative, it's literal. The road between the two starts in Jerusalem, leads south to Jericho. You start at about 1,200 feet of altitude, which is kind of like Berkeley, and you end up about 20 feet below sea level. So it's like if you looked at him from the side as he's walking, he's going like this, downhill to Jericho. Little does he know that his life is also going downhill in some ways that he can't anticipate. And he fell among robbers who stripped him and beat him and departed, leaving him half dead. Now by chance a priest was going down that road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. So likewise a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he journeyed, came to where he was, and when he saw him, he had compassion. He went to him and bound up his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he set him on his own animal and brought him to an inn and took care of him. And the next day he took out 2 denarii and gave it to the innkeeper, saying, take care of him, and whatever more you spend, I will repay when I come back. which of these three do you think proved to be a neighbor to the man who fell among the robbers? And he, meaning the lawyer, said, the one who showed him mercy. And Jesus said to him, you go and do likewise. Now, this path from Jerusalem to Samaria was so violent and so dangerous, it was known as the way of blood, because so much blood had been shed there. Like California, where you try to drive from, say, the San Francisco area to Tahoe, 80 is the only way to get there. I mean, I was telling Jen when we were driving around on vacation, what is it with California that there's always only one road from where you are to where you need to be? You can go off on some little roads to get there, but it'll take you the rest of your life. To get out to Tahoe, you've just got to get on 80 and just keep driving. And this is the road from these two cities. There's just no way around it. It's like taking the 5 to LA. You wish you didn't have to, but come on, you do. You're forced to take this road. And so he's on this road, not for some casual journey. He's not sightseeing. Only necessity takes you on a road like this, down the way of blood. Imagine that big green road sign at the top of it, just outside of Jerusalem. Welcome to the way of blood. Well, you will be ambushed and beaten until you're half dead. But this is the reputation that everyone knows in first century Palestine of what takes place on this road. And so this man who might have been Jewish because he's coming from Jerusalem, we really don't know, the robbers grab him, beat the daylights out of him. It's a brutal mugging, and he is left by the side of the road, kind of in the ditch, and he is half dead. And along comes his saviors, two religious people. One is a priest, the other is a Levite. And as they walk along, we don't know what's in their mind. It could be they're thinking, this man isn't really beaten. He is pretending. This is just ketchup on him, not blood. This is a diversion to prepare for another ambush. And if we stop to help him, people are going to come out of the rocks and the rills and out of the bushes, and they're going to do for real to us what has been done in pretend to him. And so we better keep going, because if we stop, who knows what's going to happen to us. Or they could have gone all technical and said, well, we're religious people, and technically in certain seasons under the law of the Hebrew Scriptures, we're not really allowed to touch dead bodies, and man, he's not moving. I don't want to become ceremonially unclean and disqualify myself. When you don't want to help, there's always a good reason. When you don't feel like being a good neighbor, it's amazing the rationales that will pour into your mind for that not taking place. There's always a great reason not to help. Too tired, too busy, too this, too that, don't have a quarter. There's just filled with reasons. And so filled with these reasons, they just look and say, oh man, somebody's going to do something about this. And they just keep rolling. And then Jesus introduces the unthinkable, which is the notion of a Samaritan, which to the Jewish audience he's talking about is completely disgusting. They regard the Samaritans as half-breeds, as used to be Jewish people from the northern part of Israel whose genetic background was corrupted by foreign people that moved into that area to take over it, and they became kind of a mixed race group. So this is a race thing. And they just regard the Samaritans as anathema and themselves as the pure people of God. And so the notion of a Samaritan even being introduced into the story just is probably making the lawyer go, he's blanching, the blood's draining out of his face, because he can't believe that Jesus would even bring something like that in. And then when the Samaritan does what he does, which he sees the man, and all of a sudden he's got no good reasons not to help. You know what love does? Love changes the questions from what's going to happen to me if I stop to what's going to happen to him if I don't. The priest and the Levite have the first question, because there's always great reasons when I don't feel like helping. The Samaritan, this mongrel, this mixed race, half-breed, revolting, disgusting from the perspective of the priest and the Levite, this guy, he feels compassion, Jesus says in the story, and instead of asking, what'll happen to me if I stop? I could get jumped, I could get ambushed, I could become ceremonially unclean. I have to go back to my Samaritan family and tell them that I touched a Jew, which would be just as offensive to them as it was to the priest the other way around. When instead of asking all of that stuff, he says, if someone doesn't help this guy, he's going to die. And so love simply takes the questions and turns them around. He finds the man, picks him up, pours in what were medicinal things in those days, oil and wine, and helps him to an inn where he pays for him to stay a couple days' wages, tells the innkeeper, I'll even come back and pay more if he needs more time than that to get ready, because if I don't stop and do this, nobody's going to do this. So love flips the questions around. Now, historically, when Christians have read this story from ancient times, they saw it as an allegory, beginning with an ancient scholar named Origen. And the allegory was the Samaritan in the ditch is Adam, or rather the man in the ditch is Adam. The Samaritan who stops to help is Jesus dying on the cross and saving the man. So it's an allegory of salvation. Later on, during the Reformation, scholars at that time began to say, no, it's not an allegory of salvation. It's an ethical story about crossing racial lines to help people who aren't like you. And as I'm reading all this commentary and studying, and I'm thinking, these are really two sides of the same coin, because Jesus begins the dialogue answering the question, what must I do to inherit eternal life? But he does it by going to a subsidiary question, which is, who is my neighbor? One of them has to do with eternal life, with salvation, with the big ticket items. The other one has to do with who do I care about? And I think what he's saying there is that the notion of him dying on the cross to save us isn't an alternative to ethical conduct. It should be the genesis of ethical conduct. Because of the example that he set for us, my questions can be reversed. And instead of saying, what happens to me if I stop? I can say, what happens to him if I don't? I was walking down Shattuck the other day, probably on the way to a movie. In fact, I was on a staycation. And I came to a panhandler who was collecting cans, soda cans. You know how everybody does? Our recycling day is on Thursday in our neighborhood. And so everybody goes through all of our recycling bins up and down the street, picking up cans and taking it back, and you recycle these for money for the aluminum that's in it. And so this is a time-honored and respected practice in our city, which we always put our cans out so everybody can haul them away and do whatever happens to cans. I don't even know where they go. And so there's a man standing on the street. He's got a big shopping cart and a big kind of black tarp thing over it, and he's obviously stuffing this with cans, which he's taking to the can place where presumably there's some kind of income that you receive from this. And a Pepsi can slips out of his hand and falls to the sidewalk in front of me. And he points to it. And I thought, ooh, decision time. So I thought, well, I know how to play shortstop. So I reached down and picked up the can and handed it to him. It's a can to me. It's probably a nickel to you, and a lot of nickels, they matter when you live out of a shopping cart. So I handed the thing back to the guy who wasn't my age, wasn't my race, wasn't my life, wasn't my anything. I just kind of gave it back to him and kept walking on. And you know what I realized? That wasn't so bad. We have all these huge inflated fears about how awful and dangerous it's going to be to care about somebody or to love somebody or to help somebody. And oh, I won't get my studying done for my midterm, or I'm going to be too tired to go to work the next day, or I'm going to get jumped in this parking lot, and I can't go there to help him because he could just be laying up there so that I can be ambushed. And really what the world tells you is all of this stuff is going to happen if you stop even 2 seconds to help someone, but really in the real world, none of it's really true. 99% of the time when you help, you love, you care, it turns out to be so great for you, and you're not murdered. You're not even hurt or beat up. We see the level of need, and need looks like threat, and threat looks like danger, and we read that danger and say, that could become me, but you know what? It isn't going to happen. Very few people die in the process of helping someone else. Very few people fail in their profession or their calling or their school or their athletic pursuits or their dream or their vision for their life. Oh, no one loses everything by helping somebody else. That's just what the world around us wants us to believe. And that's where all those reasons come from that fill our minds up with, oh no, can't do this, too busy, can't do that, can't do this, can't do that, can't do this. That's what I would call charity love. And I mean charity in the good sense, not charity in the, oh, here's my quarter, you know, but charity like old-fashioned King James Version charity. Charity like love charity, where I see someone in need and I help them out. Love changes the questions from what happens to me if I stop to what happens to you if I don't. But it changes the questions in another way. It can change the question from how can I help this individual person to should we really have roads where people get beat up? I mean, all the Roman troops are up there in Jerusalem guarding the 1%ers, the Roman overlords who rule this place. And meanwhile, everybody, Jew, Gentile, Samaritan, whatever, who goes up and down this road is overcome by these robbers, so much so that the place is called the Way of Blood. Do we really want a road called the Way of Blood? Do we really want a place in the freeway called the Maze? Does anybody want that? Have you been there trying to get in and out of San Francisco at drive time? You better bring a lunch because you're going to be in a parking lot half the day. Does anybody want a road like that? There's love as charity, but there's also love as engineering. There's love as making a better system. There's love as making a better road. There's love as making a place where you don't have to be overtaken by robbers. You don't have to be so vulnerable. I see people live sometimes in our city in a way that their life just hangs by a thread. Just the slightest small thing that goes wrong, and their life comes down like a house of cards. They crash into this. Is that the best we can do? I saw the outcome of a joint study this week that was conducted by Harvard and Cal. That's a lot of smart people in a room, isn't it? Harvard and Cal. And what they discovered was that in the San Francisco, San Jose area, if you are a child growing up in the bottom 20% of the economy, that's not maybe abject poverty, but that's still pretty tough to grow up in that, especially in this area. If you're growing up in the bottom 20% of the economy this year, you know what your odds are of ever reaching the top 20% of the economy? And by the way, the top only requires an income of about $100,000, which in a city with 137,000 millionaires isn't even real money. I know people that wouldn't cross the street for $100,000. But to get from the bottom 20% to the top 20% in San Francisco, San Jose, your odds of reaching the top 20% from poverty are 11%. Now, my conservative friends have an answer for that. They say all we need to do is trust capitalism, recriminalize abortion, keep gay marriage off the books, and we'll be good. My progressive friends have another answer for that. They say we need to keep the right to choose, we need to legalize gay marriage, and we need to let the government intervene with massive programs to fix everything. Now, I hear both of these sides going back and forth, and I think, really? That's all we've got to bring to the table? We can either trust the free market because people who don't have anything because they don't deserve to have anything because they're not as deserving as the people who are deserving. Or we can trust some kind of government intervention because the people that have things stole it all and are oppressors and have it through unjust conduct and aren't deserving. They're just a bunch of trust fund babies, and we should just stick it to them so we can transfer everything around to everybody else. And I think we'd all agree that free markets have a place and government has a place. We kind of need a lot of different options. But I don't think we're ever going to rescue enough individual people, pulling folks out of the ditch charity-wise, or we could ever set up brilliant enough programming, as good as some of that can be, and as really important as some of it is, that we're ever going to move the huge, massive people who really deserve a better life out of where they are to where they could be, leaving aside the billion people who live on less than $1 a day around the world, and hundreds of thousands of children, for example, that are going to die of waterborne disease this year. Someone has to figure out how to build better roads. Someone has to figure out how to make a road where people aren't beaten, where they're not ambushed, where they're not torn down. We came to Berkeley because I believe that when people's hearts get full of the love of God, they become road builders. They become engineers. They become system designers. They become the heads of nonprofits. They become the heads of NGOs. They come up with great ideas. They use capitalism, but they use government things too. They redevelop communities. They start new initiatives. They figure out ways to get child care to people so that they can work during the day. They put together cities that are smarter, faster, and better, and more energy efficient. They find ways to fertilize crops without destroying soil. They come up with things because God is when God sees you or sees that person living on $1 a day in the developing nations poor, God's mind is not filled with all the reasons why he shouldn't help. Oh, I don't want to touch that person, I'll soil my hands. Or they don't have the things that they would like to have because they don't deserve them. If they were deserving, they'd have them. Or why don't we invent a massive police state and we'll just force everybody to do what they should be doing. All God sees is love. And his heart is compassion for us. You know what I think God really wants to do? He wants to take a bunch of people in this city and fill them with that same compassion, the kind that comes from the Spirit of the living God, and birth inside their hearts stuff that will not only do love in charity, remember we mean that in a positive sense, but will also do love in engineering. And that's the only word, forgive me for, that I could come up with for kind of redeveloping and rebooting things so that the reaching down into the ditch becomes less necessary because there are fewer people beat half to death. Our city is full of people beat half to death. And most of them, I'm not talking about people that you see asking for quarters on Shattuck Avenue necessarily. I mean people who sometimes have just great jobs and careers, but in their hearts and minds, they're just beaten to pieces. I mean, sometimes the women that we see walking down the street who are nicely dressed and pushing $4,000 titanium baby strollers, and they have the black eye right here, which means the husband is right-handed. People who are beat half to death. Someone not only needs to help those who are in the ditch, but somebody needs to make roads where we don't have so many ditches. We don't have so many ambushes. We don't have so much pain and so much suffering, where people get just a shot at life. And I think all of these things that we have here, things like government, things like free markets, these are just tools. They're just tools in a toolbox to use. But someone has to care enough to pick them up and use them, and to create this huge middle of social enterprise, or whatever you like to call it, that can make the pathways available for people that will give them lives that truly mean something to them and to the world, rather than just knowing what it feels like to have to blows land. As great as it is to have somebody pull you out of the ditch when that happens, I believe that this group of people and many others in the city are a group in whom that is possible. So many of you are already involved in things like that. And I believe one of the reasons we're here is to be a place where God can birth that dream in all of us, of how we can be that person. Not only loved by charity, but how we can be the person who is the road builder, is the one who wants to create a way where the beatings are less common. Martin Luther King put it this way: on the one hand, we're called to play the Good Samaritan on life's roadside, but that will be only an initial act. One day we must come to see that the whole Jericho road must be transformed so that men and women will not be constantly beaten and robbed as they make their journey on life's highway. True compassion is more than flinging a coin to a beggar. It is not haphazard and superficial. It comes to see that an edifice which produces beggars needs restructuring. We have a wonderful three-dimensional example of this today in the form of our friend Rochelle Warner, who has just returned from being a road builder in Africa. And I'd like to invite Rochelle to come and join me, and we'd just like to have her share a little bit with you about what this can actually look like in the life of a real live person that you know. Let's give her a big hand as she tells us share us. So Rochelle, you haven't been in church in a long time. Where have you been?
Well, I've been in church, but just in Africa. It's different. The major difference is that they clap different. That's about it. It's not the normal clap.
We'll have to have you teach that to us.
Yeah.
So tell us about your trip, where you went, and what you were involved in.
Sure. So I spent a month in the country of Ghana, and we had a mobile clinic. We set out from the capital city where we were living every day, and we went to villages, and we set up a clinic. So it would be turned into a huge community gathering. Everybody would come out, and the elderly people would usually be seen first as a sign of respect in their cultures. And so, by the way, how we did that was we were working in partnership with the locals there, because we didn't want it to seem like white superiorism. We were really helping Ghanaians help each other, and so it was interesting to learn the differences of the culture and to see how, as much as possible, we let them figure out the system of who gets seen what first and priorities. But we set up a system to where, we had the vital station with interns like myself taking blood pressure reads and getting chief complaints. We had 3 doctors. One of them was actually a medical student from the UK, and they would see the patient. So they have the doctor, a person shadowing the doctor. We had a translator, and then the family unit. That was another thing. It wasn't just one patient, the whole family came in. And they had the pharmacy, where a lot of the medicines we gave out were just over-the-counter drugs. So it was really humbling to just, it was just seeing a different culture and experiencing that was really great. Noticed just the importance of family and how everybody looked after each other. We had some people, everybody was looking out for, even like the 2-year-old that was just kind of crawling around. Everybody's aunt, everybody who was 12 years old, everybody looked after each other. It was really cool to see that kind of community, and just to see that what we came to offer, we had like over-the-counter medications which weren't available to them, and just to see how much that they had to offer us too.
Wow. Is there any one experience that sort of stands out to you from your time in Africa, or maybe one person that really made an impact on you, or a situation that you were in?
Let's see. One person. Okay. Well, I'd say probably the most impactful time I had was just playing with the children, because there's a lot where you learn from the children. They're easy to pick up, and there's a lot of nonverbal communication that you can have with them to demonstrate Christ's love to them. And I think it's just really, really exciting to be able to be sitting with the doctors and to see a kid who's freaked out because they're seeing some like strange foreigner person who looks nothing like them, wearing scary stethoscope. He's trying to put its thermometer underneath his armpit or something. To being able to see those kids, calm them down, and see how we can demonstrate love to them, and to literally calm their nerves down, and then see them warm up to you. And they're sitting on my lap, and I've got to put my stethoscope in his ears and let him hear his own heartbeat, and that was really cool and special. And then he turned around and he looked at me, and he just started talking. I was like, I have no idea what he's saying right now, but it was cool because you can really just see how much love there was to go around.
What kind of impact did the trip have on you, Rochelle? Obviously, you're glad you went.
Yes.
What did it just mean to you personally?
I think one of the things I walked away learning is that everybody has a place. Like, we worked with the translators, and everybody has different skills, and what a beautiful thing it is when everybody comes together. A lot of us, we have, the medical skills, which we were using to, that was the purpose of our trip. But even within that, we had people who were they had the harder thing of saying like, no, we can only see 100 patients. We'll be back in the clinic tomorrow. Like those people are important. We had people who just absolutely thrive playing with kids, who loved teaching children. We had translators, and we had people who were gifted in telling stories and engaging the community. So while people were just sitting and waiting to see the doctor, they weren't doing that. They were being led in times of prayer and hearing stories. So that was impactful.
So road builders don't work alone then?
No,
Was the group.
always a team.
You guys were instrumental in Michelle's trip in the funding side of it. You gave the largest missions offering we've ever collected here. It was 3 times bigger than any other missions offering we've ever done. So you all own a piece of what's happened in Rochelle's life, and it helped build that road for some children there. So could you give her a big hand? I ask you to stand with me, if you would, please. And our band's going to come and play, do some worship for us. And I'm just going to ask you really simple. If you're comfortable with this, I really believe these dreams for these things, they just have to come from God. They have to be really in our heart. It's not just some good idea that we come up with, but just really something that the Holy Spirit puts inside of us. And if you're comfortable with it this morning as we pray and worship, and if you'd like to have that kind of thing released in your own life, I'm just going to ask you to come to the front area here and just find a place to stand. We won't embarrass you or make you feel awkward in any way, but we would just like to pray with you briefly that the Lord would just release this in your life, that God would give you just a real vision as not just a person of charity, but as a road building person. Because wherever you're standing in your life, that's your road. That's your road. And the Lord you're just one idea from greatness. Just one idea from greatness. And we believe that sometimes those great things, the fuse on those gets lit in moments like that. So if you'd like to just open your heart to receive that, ask God to just come and pour something like that into you in this space or in the days ahead. As we sing, come and find a place, and we'll ask some of our prayer people to come and just pray with you briefly, and you can return to your seat. And we'll believe God is going to begin something great today.